tomorrow. I'm Tarrant.
And I'm Stella. Welcome to Meeple University, How to Play Nanty Narking by Martin Wallace.
Nanty Narking is a game of fast-changing area control set in Victorian-era London. Players begin the game with specific secret objectives about how to do their area control, and the first player to meet his or her objective wins the game.
Nanty Narking was originally released in 2011 as This World and More Falcke by Terry Pratchett. Due to the expiring license of the This World universe, this is now being rethemed and renamed as Nanty Narking, which just also means good times in the old Victorian slang.
At the time that we're filming this video, Nanty Narking is a live project on Kickstarter, so do check it out there if you're interested in what you see. We're filming from a prototype copy, so the art and components may not be final.
Now, let's learn how to play Nanty Narking.
Nanty Narking is, at its core, an area control game. Players will be moving their pawns, representing their agents, throughout the city to try to control areas, and they may also try to build buildings in order to gain the benefit of a certain area. At any sign of conflict, trouble will come onto the board, and trouble can change the actions which will occur in different areas. Players take it in turns to take actions by playing cards and taking the actions shown in the corner. This continues until a player has met his or her secret objective, which is dealt at the start of the game, and the first player to meet his or her secret objective wins the game. To set up the game, each player takes 12 pawns and 6 buildings in his or her colour. These all look different, but this is purely thematic. All the pawns and all the buildings play the same way. Then, each player places 1 pawn in the East End, 1 pawn in the City, and 1 pawn in Chelsea. Add a trouble marker to each of these 3 regions. Each player also takes £10 from the bank. The remaining trouble markers, the Grenadier and Immigrant tokens, which serve as neutral tokens, and the D12 can all sit near the board. Take the black-backed personality cards, which represent the secret objectives in the game, removing this card if you're playing with 2 players, and then shuffle up the cards and deal 1 to each player, removing the rest from the game. There is also a set of variant personality cards showing this V in the top corner, which you can use instead of the basic game personality cards. Take all of the yellow-backed action cards and separate them into 2 stacks based on whether the text is red or grey. Shuffle each stack separately and place the grey cards on top of the red ones. Then deal a starting hand of 5 to each player. Shuffle the green-backed random event cards and place them next to the board, and lay the blue-backed city cards face up next to the board. Like so. There should be 1 card for each of the 12 regions on the board. You're now ready to start the game. On each player's turn, a player takes actions on the main board by playing 1 card from his or her hand. The player then takes the actions shown in the top left corner of that card in the order printed on the card, from top to bottom. All of these actions are optional, and so a player could skip 1 or more of those, or even all of them if he or she wished. The exception to this is the random event, indicated by this bird icon. If a player plays a card with this icon, he or she must resolve that random event. On most turns, a player will play only 1 card, but some effects will allow a player to play multiple cards on the same round, resolving each subsequent card in the same way. After the player has played all cards and resolved all actions, he or she discards the cards played and draws back up to 5 cards in hand. If the player has more than 5 cards in hand through some effect that the player has had during the round, he or she does not have to discard down to 5 but does not draw any more cards. Next, we'll go through all the different types of actions in the game. The first type of action is to place an agent, indicated by this icon. To place an agent, the player takes 1 of his or her available agent pawns and then places it in any region of the board where the player already has an agent or which is adjacent to a location where the player already has an agent. The locations are the 12 regions on the board, which are divided by these dotted stripes. If a player's 12 agent pawns are already on the board when taking this action, the player can remove a pawn from any location and then place it based on the same placement rules as before. When a player places a pawn into an area that already has at least one pawn, and that can include the player's own pawn, or it can include the immigrant or grenadier pawns. Anytime this happens, the player places a trouble marker on that region, unless the region already has a trouble marker. The trouble marker dictates which other actions can and cannot be taken within that region. The second action is the police helmet icon, which allows you to remove trouble from the board. By playing this action, you may take any trouble marker from the board and remove it. The third action is assassinate. When a player assassinates, he or she may take any other player's pawn, including the neutral pawns, from a region which contains a trouble marker, and remove it from the board. The marker is returned to the player's supply. It can be deployed again later in the game, and the trouble marker is also removed upon completing the assassination. The fourth type of action is to take money. When a player plays that, the player takes the amount of money printed next to the icon. The fifth type of action is to place a building, indicated by the building icon. To place a building, you must choose a region where you have at least one agent, where there is no existing building, and where there is no existing trouble marker. As long as the area meets that requirement, pay the cost printed on the board. In this case, it's £6, but it varies depending on the regions, and then place one of your buildings on that area. Then you can take the corresponding city card, which will give you a once per turn bonus printed in text, which you'll be able to take from subsequent turns onwards. Although none of the objective cards in the game specifically requires a player to build buildings as a prerequisite for victory, all of the buildings will give you a bonus that you can take on every turn. Many of them, for example, give you an ongoing cash income, which will give you more cash than many other players, so these can be helpful in achieving your goals. The sixth type of action is to play another card, indicated by this icon. When you play a card with that icon on your turn, you can then play another one after it, and you can continue chaining cards together as long as they have this icon on it until you play one which does not. The seventh type of action is indicated by the scroll, and this indicates a text action. All cards that have a scroll will have some text down the bottom indicating the specific action associated with that card. And so if you take that text action, simply follow the text on the card. The eighth type of action is the interrupt action, which is indicated by this hand icon. Interrupt cards are generally not played within your turn. You'll typically play them outside of your turn, as they can be used to avoid or negate some negative effect which someone is attempting to impose upon you. The ninth and final action in the game is the random event action, indicated by this bird. And once again, if you play a card with the random event icon on it, you must perform this action. You're not allowed to skip it. To perform this action, flip the top card of the random event deck. In most cases, you will then roll a d12, which will give you a number relating to one of the regions on the board. You may have to do this a couple of times. There will be then some negative effect in that region. For example, in Earthquake, you'll roll the die twice and then destroy any buildings in the regions that are there. If buildings are destroyed by random events, they go back to the player's personal supply. The player can build them again later, but the player must return the city card that was taken for building a building in that region. Additionally, the random events deck has the immigrants and martial law cards, which are the ways to get these two neutral pawns, the immigrants and grenadiers, onto the board. To revise again quickly on the rules regarding trouble markers. A trouble marker is placed on the board anytime a player places a pawn into a region which already has another pawn, even if that pawn belongs to the same player. But this does not occur when a player builds a building. Trouble markers are then removed from the board in one of two ways. Either using the helmet icon shown on the card, which allows a player to remove a single trouble marker from anywhere on the board, or a trouble marker is removed from a region anytime a pawn is moved out of that region. This can be through assassination, in which case the pawn is removed along with the trouble marker. It can be because of the text effect on the bottom of a card, which allows a pawn to be moved or removed, such as this one here. In this case, the region from which the pawn is moved would lose its trouble marker. And if a player has all of his or her pawns on the board and moves one instead of placing a new one, the trouble marker would be removed from that pawn's region, although it would be moved to the new one. These are the only ways to move trouble markers off the board. Finally, I'll talk about each of the different endgame objectives that a player may have. There are 7 endgame objective cards, and you will deal from the whole pack, excluding this one in a 2-player game, so you won't know exactly which of these will be in your game. Firstly, I'll talk about the Lords, and all 3 of the Lords have the same endgame objective. They need to control a certain number of areas on the board. They need to have control over 7 areas in a 2-player game, 5 areas in a 3-player game, and 4 areas in a 4-player game. To control an area, a player must have strictly more pieces in his or her colour, that is agents and buildings, than any other single player has in that area. So the yellow player controls Highbury and Holborn because he or she has the only piece in that area, and controls this area because although he or she has only 2, each of the other 3 colours in that area have only 1, and so yellow has the majority. In this region here, even though yellow has an agent and a building versus purple's 2 agents, this still counts as 2 pieces each, and so neither player has control in this area. When considering the neutral coloured pieces, the brown immigrants are simply considered as if they're another player colour, so yellow does not have control of this region as he or she has the same number of pieces as the immigrants. Finally, a player can never have control of a region containing a red grenadier pawn. That region is under martial law, and so the military controls it. A player playing as Professor Moriarty is attempting to spread agents across the board. If the player has agents in 11 of the 12 regions in a 2-player game, 10 of the 12 regions in a 3-player game, or 9 of the 12 regions in a 4-player game, he or she wins the game. The player does not have to have control over those regions, they simply have to have an agent in there, and buildings do not count towards this objective. Grenadiers and immigrants also have no impact upon Professor Moriarty's ability to complete this objective. A player playing as Monsieur de Sidonia is attempting to get a net worth of £50 or greater to win the game. This is the sum of all cash on hand, plus the cash value of any buildings which were built during the game. Once the player has £50 or more, he or she wins the game. A player playing as Fagin wants to spread trouble across the board, and so if there are 8 trouble markers on the board, spread across the 12 regions, Fagin wins the game. It does not matter whether Fagin has agents, buildings, or any other assets anywhere on the board. In all 4 of these cases, the trigger to end the game must occur at the start of the player's turn. So the player must still have control or still have that amount of money, or there must still be enough trouble on the board at the beginning of that player's turn in order to win the game. The final endgame condition is that of Sherlock Holmes. If the action card deck runs out and no other player has yet won the game, then Sherlock Holmes wins the game. If the draw deck runs out and the Sherlock Holmes personality card is not in the game, then the players calculate a final score regardless of their other objectives, and the player with the highest score wins. The score is determined by adding leftover cash in hand to the cash value of any buildings that the player has built, and then gaining £5 for every agent that the player has on the board. Highest score wins, and in the event of a tie, whoever has the highest value building in his or her collection breaks the tie. This scoring occurs only if the game ends due to running out of cards and Sherlock Holmes is not in the game, or if the Riots random event ends the game. And this will occur if this is drawn with 8 trouble markers or more on the board.
And that's how to play Nanty Narking. We hope that you enjoyed the video and we hope that you enjoyed playing. We certainly did enjoy our game, and Tarrant beating me as Professor Moriarty and I lost as Sherlock Holmes.
Yes, I was just lucky. Please click on the Meeple in the corner to subscribe to our channel if you'd like to hear more from Meeple University.